I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
Always my pleasure, Jim.
Young Justin Trudeau, maybe we shouldn't call him that anymore. He is 42 years old, and on Christmas, he'll be a little older than that. He has the job of putting together a cabinet. He's promised half of them will be women, or at least half. Is that the right thing to do?
Well, I think he has to do that in this day and age. You know, there's always the argument, well, just put in the best people. Well, that could work another way, too. It could all be women or a majority women. I think, we talked about this not long ago, Jim. A premier or a prime minister has got a very difficult task. Not only does he have to get quality in his cabinet, he's got to make sure that there is a reasonable gender balance, a racial balance, a geographical balance, and so on. Now, those who are listening now saying, well, why the hell do I care if a guy comes from Oshkosh or wherever? Well, you think of it now. If you're just in British Columbia, supposing you put together a cabinet and you've got, say, 45 people to choose from, you better have somebody there from Kamloops. You better have somebody there from Prince George. You better have somebody there from the Peace River. You better have one or two from the Okanagan. And you better have somebody from Victoria, and so on. Now, it may be that there are better people, but I think if you think about it, you can understand that a premier has got to serve the whole province, and more than that, he's got to get elected in the whole province. Now, it's the same thing with gender balance and so on. You got different groups, women, Indo-Canadians, whatever it may be, that you require to get elected. And it's a crass business, I suppose, Jim, but that's what you have to do. And one can cluck their tongues all they want, but there isn't a premier or prime minister in the English-speaking world now that isn't going to do that because it's survival.
A whole different style for the swearing in. It'll be done in public in front of the Parliament buildings. Thousands of people expected to be there. Compare that to Mr. Harper's last swearing in, where they all kind of slunk in almost under the cover of darkness.
Well, I think that's a good idea. I think people like to see what's happening, and I applaud that. That's good open government, I think. I know we were always sworn in Government House, and I think apart from the press and our wives, that's the only people that saw it. But no, I think that's a good idea, and I think it tells us that young Trudeau, as you say, is looking to talk to sort of all Canadians, not just the people that put the money in his pocket to get there.
Well, when Glenn Clark was sworn in as Premier of BC, he didn't do it at the legislature. He did it live at the Collingwood Community Centre in East Vancouver. I was there, and I thought that was pretty unique, where, just regular folks were there to see him to be sworn in.
Well, I think that's a hell of a good idea. I hadn't thought about it, to be honest, but it hits me as being a very good idea, a good way to sort of have, that old phrase, the common touch.
What about the selection process that goes into picking cabinet ministers? Do they lobby for the position, or is it up to the prime minister or a premier to decide who should be in it?
Well, they lobby at their peril, I would think. I suppose there is some. There are probably people that have known the prime minister longer than others that may be doing some lobbying. And I can only go on my own personal experience, Jim, and that's a long time ago, and it's a rather narrow experience. I wouldn't have dared. I just thought, well, the premier knows who I am, and I'll just have to sit and wait. I suspect that the more senior people at that time, Grace McCarthy and so on, may have had a word with the Premier, but I really honestly don't know. I think most people just sit back and wait and hope.
What's the difference in your paycheck between being a regular Joe in the legislature or the Parliament buildings and being a cabinet minister? Isn't that a big pay raise?
It's very substantial. Now, at one time, and this, again, you see, you've got an old guy here, it was about double. I don't think it's that much now, but it certainly is very substantial. It's if it's not double, it's very close to it. So, there's a great financial incentive to getting into cabinets, and I suppose that's sort of proves Napoleon's old statement that every foot soldier has a marshal's baton in his knapsack. He thinks he can do the job better, and he wants in, not just because he thinks he can do the job better. He wants the pay, the prestige, and all the rest of it. And there's considerable, and there are cars involved, and business class travel, and so on and so forth. So the perks of being in cabinets are substantial.
Well, we saw under Mr. Harper how some ministers really took advantage of it. The Aboriginal Affairs Minister in London moved across the street just to go from a 5-star hotel to an 8-star hotel where they charge about $60 for a glass of orange juice. Well,
that to me is ridiculous. You do have this, I think, Jim, and I know that people will kind of raise their eyebrows at this, but when you're on government business, you do have to have a decent address. You can't be living in the Hotel Splendide in the east part of London. You've got to have a decent address. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be staying at the top of Claridge's at $1,500 a night, but you do have to have a decent address. But that sort of thing that you're talking about is just flagrant abuse. There's no question about that.
Speaking about having a decent address, 24 Sussex Drive, the Prime Minister's official residence, apparently is a run-down dump and has needed renovations for the last 50 years.
Last time I saw it, it was a run-down dump, and hell, that's 35 years ago.
We should spend the $10 million to fix it up, or maybe tear it down and build a new one?
Well, I would think you'd go to your real estate experts right here in Vancouver, and they'd be able to tell you in 10 seconds, rip her down, put up a new one. To repair something like that is going to be too expensive. Now, I don't know, Jim. I live in a nice, modest condo, so I don't know about those things, but that's what I suspect by reading the papers.
Well, I mean, when people like Nixon were making fun of it because it was run down, of course, he got a brand new White House after the Canadian troops burnt down the original White House back in the War of 1812 to 1814.
Yes, poor old Dolly Madison had to run, and James Madison. Yeah, that was quite a humiliation. But the presidents and their wives seem to have a free hand. Many of them seem to go in there and destroy the furnishings and put in new furnishings, and new everything. I don't know what the rules are here, but I suspect are there. But I suspect they're a little tougher here. But
Public Works Canada, yeah, they can be pretty tough on their own people.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And the President of the United States is held in awe. There's no question about that. Even when the president's gone for 25 years, he's still called Mr. President and treated that way. So they have a different attitude towards presidents than we do towards prime ministers. I prefer ours.
Do you think BC's provincial government will get along with the federal Liberals?
Well, I don't know whether they could get along with anybody, Jim. I know that's an awful thing to say, but I just have no faith in them at all. I think that Christy Clark had, and I wrote about this, had a deal with Harper, and it had to do with the HST payback that BC owed, and I think that she was so nice all the time to him. It was because of that. I rather liked the days and when there was tension. I think that's a good thing to have. I don't mean that nastiness. I mean that there is a tension, that a premier of a province like British Columbia doesn't have any hesitation in going back to 24 Sussex and saying, look, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is what we're entitled to, this is what the Constitution says, et cetera, and I'm going to get it and tell the press they're going to get it. But we've seen, I think, pussyfooting in the last little while, and I don't think that Christie's got the jam to do it, but I hope so. We'll see.
Well, Harper refused to meet with the premiers, and he's already met with the Premier of Ontario. Or I should say Justin has met with the Premier of Ontario.
Well, if Justin doesn't meet with the Premier of Ontario, he's mad. You know, that's where the votes come from. But I think you're going to see an entirely different setup. His father wasn't delighted to meet the premiers, but he did, and he met them in conference on a fairly regular basis. I'm sure it was at least once a year, because I was at most of them, and you know, they were happening. And I think Justin recognizes that this has to happen, and it's the way you keep the country together. You know, if we had a proper Senate, as they have in Australia and the United States and so on, a lot of this would be unnecessary because the regions would have an input, legislative input, that they don't have now. But they don't have that. So the only way the provinces, the smaller provinces, or not necessarily smaller, but the ones remote from the center, the less populated ones, the only way they can have influence is at a first minister's meeting and with the prime minister. And I think that Trudeau is going to recognize that. Matter of fact, I'm positive he will.
Well, Michael Duffy seemed to have a lot of influence as a senator from PEI, a little speck of dirt out in the ocean.
Well, I don't know whether that's quite the kind of influence I was talking about. No, you do have that kind of thing goes on. What I meant really, though, Jim, is that, you know, provinces have financial needs and legislative needs and so on that they have no way to actually put to the federal government in a legislative way, because the Senate is well, it's as useless as tits on a bull, as you know. So the only way they can really do that is in what we used to call the First Minister's Conference. They call it something else now, I forget now, but that's the only way you can really do it. And I think, frankly, they were pretty useful. As I say, I went to a hell of a lot of them, and I thought they were pretty useful.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, Prime Minister Harper put a cap on health care funding from Ottawa. Do you think Trudeau will keep that cap?
Well, that's always an interesting question. One way or another, the provinces have got to get the money because they're the ones that are up front with the health care. And it's always a political game. Harper, that's probably the only place he was honest. At least he said, I'm not going to pay you, so to hell with you. But I don't think that he couldn't have got away with that much longer. I think that Trudeau is going to have to loosen up the purse strings. The cost of health care have gone, skyrocketed. Now, having said that, I think that there are reforms in the system that must be made, and that he's going to probably have a quid pro quo and deal with that too. But health care, there's no way the feds can avoid it for very long. It's been avoided for too long by Harper, and I think Trudeau knows that. And he knows he's got to get back in the game, and I think he will.
Trudeau campaigned with the promise that he'd increase the taxes on the top 1% and lower taxes for the so-called middle class. A Stats Canada study found those people in that 1% make $455,000 a year. They pay $155,000 in tax, meaning they clear $300,000. And another study just found that if they did up their tax rate just marginally, the federal government would make an extra $15 billion.
Well, you see, you're going to have the Fraser Institute screaming blue murder that top 1% does all of the financing, blah, 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 blah. It's long overdue that people making that kind of money should be taxed properly. There's just no question about that. It's been going on. Well, the reason it's been going on, of course, and I guess we can say this, that those very people are the ones that finance the political parties, and that's why they get away with it. That's got to end. There's no question about that. Oddly enough, Wendy and I were just talking a similar thing coming back from the barber today, and we were talking about all the houses and the huge amounts of money that are being made by flipping houses in British Columbia, in Vancouver particularly. And my reply to that was, well, up the tax. That'll slow it down considerably. I think that there is too much money being played with at the top, and there should be taxes on it. You can't get away from enterprise, of course. You don't want to end that. You don't want to go back to wartime days when the taxes were 95% or something. But I think that there is room in there. I forget what the exact words were, but the old finance minister of France back just after, I think, the revolution said that the art was to pluck the chicken so that it hurt just a little bit, but not so much that the chicken squawked too much. There's a fine balance. And I think that Trudeau's going to find that balance. He's going to have to find that balance. We need the money, and I think people nowadays have concentrated on this. They know about it, and I think they've had enough of it.
Is Trudeau doing the right thing? He promised that he would spend a lot of money on infrastructure, and you have to admit, highways, roads, some federal buildings, they are literally falling apart, including 24 Sussex Drive. A little money might help.
Well, you have to do it. It's not a question of whether one wants to do it or not. If you don't look after your infrastructure now, you have to look after it much more expensively later on. And I think he's recognized that, and it has to happen. I think, one thing that I do worry about with Mr. Trudeau is this notion that we can do all these things without increasing the pot. And I know he's talking about deficits, and in certain times I'm not worried about deficits that much. I'm kind of a Galbraith, and that's sort of an economic thinker. But he's got to watch that there are a lot of things that have to be paid for, and it's going to cost a lot of money. But there's just no question about him doing it, Jim. I mean, you just look around and things have just got to be done. And if you don't do them now, you're going to do them at much greater cost later on.
They just did an international survey. Norway won number one for overall place, including best healthcare. Canada, though, was picked the most tolerant nation in the world. Do we deserve that title?
Well, I would have wondered during the niqab squabble during Harper, and I'm going to be serious about this, Jim. I think if we'd gone along with more of the mean-spiritedness that we had seen with Harper, particularly in the last couple of years, no, we wouldn't deserve that at all. But I've got to tell you that no nation is anywhere near perfect when it comes to this. Everybody squawks. There's always discrimination and bitching and bellyaching about people that aren't exactly like yourself or came later or whatever it may be. And it's quite an art form to have people do that sort of bitching and bellyaching, but mainly still being decent and fair and reasonable. And after this last election, I was asked by my partner in Common Sense Canadian to say something about that, and I said, well, the only thing I can think of is in Canada, even the bigots are fair. And I think that probably really says it, that you find people, that say all these nasty things about other people, and the language is problem enrichment, and on it goes. But when it gets right down to cases, I think Canadians basically are fair. As I say, how much longer that would have gone with Harper throwing fuel on the fire, I don't know. I think it would have hurt a lot. I'm glad to say I think we have a chance to be what we're told we are, and I think we've got a better chance now than we had before by a long shot.
Well, judging by the people around me, when Team Canada, and it doesn't matter if it's hockey, soccer, rugby, my neighbors around me, you have a lot of different looking faces, but they are all cheering for Canada. Well,
my daughter and her husband live in a neighborhood in Richmond. It's a very nice neighborhood, and it's I think they're probably a very small minority of Europeans. They're mostly Indo-Canadians and Chinese descent and so on. Come Christmas time, you see the Christmas trees come piling out of all these cars going up, and the whole thing. And if we let people do those things and don't make a fuss, they just adapt and they go along. And I'll tell you something else that I found some years ago, Jim. You may find this interesting. During the Charlottetown Accord referendum, I had a bet with Jazz Johal. You remember Jazz? He's now with, I think, doing nasty things for Enbridge or somebody. But he was in the media, and he was a colleague of mine at CKW. And the Indo-Canadian community had been told by Mo Sahota that they should vote yes for the Charlottetown. And I said to Jazz, what do you think? And he said, oh yeah, they'll vote yes. And I said, I'll bet you right now a case of beer that they vote exactly the same way everybody else does. And if you remember that vote, Jim, if you looked at from constituency to constituency, there wasn't more than 2 or 3% difference in any one of them. So I'm content that if you leave things and are decent, honorable people, most people are Canadians, and most people will do as other Canadians do.
Rafe, I don't know if you have a comment on this. A friend asked, are Canadian junior markets overregulated? Because, I mean, BC was built on mining, forestry, the extraction of natural resources. Right now, the companies that specialize in that cannot raise money. They spend more money on lawyers and regulators than they do exploring.
I've got to cop out, Jim, and I'll tell you why. I was very much involved in that back in 1976 and 77. That is a long time ago. And to be absolutely honest with you, I have paid zippity-doo attention to it since. Back in those days, I would have argued with you. They may have a case now. I'm just not certain.
What is really bugging you right now about what's happening in BC?
Oh, of course, the proposed LNG plant in Squamish. And I've got to tell you and your listeners that the government and the company, they're in for a hell of a fight on this. They're sort of moseying along as if we're all going to just sort of lay down and take it here. I'll tell you, we're not. And it's not just in this area. It's all throughout the lower mainland of British Columbia. I can tell you, because I'm part of the organization that's fighting this, can tell you who's jumping in and saying, we'll help, we'll help, we'll help. And it's going to be a hell of a row. One of the things, Jim, I'd like people to understand this. This is not a NIMBY issue. Most of us are nowhere near the actual plant physically, so we're not saying we don't want this in our neighborhood because who wants a jail in their backyard? This is not that issue at all. If you look at Howe Sound, it simply is not wide enough for LNG tankers. Even the industry's own organization says it's not wide enough. The American experts with whom we've checked and down in New Mexico, Sandia Laboratories have set standards, and we are way inside those standards in the sense that it's way too narrow. And the United States has passed regulations based on that, and they're not known for being overly fussy in environmental matters. They've passed those regulations. This area, the Howe Sound, simply does not make it. Now, I have a little fun with Christy Clark. Every time I hear about a tank or something hitting something, I get on the social media and say, well, this can't happen here because Christy says she won't allow it. Well, you have no idea how many of these things are happening. I subscribe to a little paper called G-Captain. It comes out every day. And these damn things are bumping into each other all over the place. Now, what has happened is that Captain Brown, Stephen Brown, who is the head of the organization here, blandly tells everybody they've gone 50 years and have never had an accident. What he doesn't tell you is he's talking about the high seas, not in these narrow inlets. And if you look at comparable inlets around the world, the Bosphorus for one, you'll find that they're hitting each other and hitting other things every bloody day, and they're sinking. And they're sinking in hurricanes and so on. Now, we have to have transit. I'm not suggesting we no longer have any ships, but you don't have to have them in an area that is far too narrow and just invite trouble. So to get back to your original question, that's what's bothering me, and it's bothering me enough that I can't wait for something to lie down in front of, and if necessary, I'm not joking, go to jail. I mean, it's that serious to people that love Howe Sound as much as we do.
Well, Howe Sound is one of the windsurfing meccas of the world, and the village or the town of Squamish has nothing to do with female native people. It means strong wind. So the town is named after the winds that come in off the sound.
Well, there's no question about that. The problem, I was a sailor for many years, the problem with sailing on Howe Sound, there was either no wind or so bloody much wind that you couldn't get out. And when they have what they call a Squamish wind, it's really big time. But the main thing is, Jim, and this is something I think we can all understand. It's not winds and tides and all the rest of it that cause the trouble. It's human error. And I don't care if you have an LNG tanker accompanied by 100 tugs. Sooner or later, one is going to have a lot of trouble. Now, here's the thing that I invite people to think about. It is a matter of odds. And even if you were to say, well, look, Rafe, the odds of one of these tankers of ever hitting anything causing trouble is 1 in 100,000. Well, now you think about that. If you've got 3,000 or 4,000 tankers going regularly, it doesn't take very long for that 100,000 to come up. Moreover, the 100,000 could happen tomorrow afternoon. Doesn't have to happen 20 years from now. And the problem with LNG tankers is when they happen, it's not just a little collision and some nasty things happen. It can be extraordinary. It can be enormous. And we in the Howe Sound area, and people, I'm not just talking about where I live, all through Bowen Island, up the Sunshine Coast, and so on. They're all saying, look, we just don't need this. I want to make a couple of other quick points if I can. People don't know about this because, of course, the bloody papers are on side with them. They're actually partners with them. They don't understand that the man who owns Woodfibre LNG is a crook. And, I've said that in writing, so I'm not worried about saying it with you. This man was fined $200 million for evasion of taxes. He's known as being an environmental rapist. He's one of the leaders in Indonesia right now that's causing all the fires that you don't read about in the local press because, as I say, they're in business with them. But you read about it if you go elsewhere for your news, as you must. This guy is bad news. What is our government doing bringing somebody like this in to run an LNG plant in Squamish? I mean, the whole thing, you're making me speechless again, Jim. You do this all the time.
Oh, Jim.
I have been around these issues for quite a while now, and I have never, ever seen one like this. There is nothing going for it. It is not particularly economically brilliant. The company itself says there'll be 100 permanent employees. Well, the usual method is to cut that in half, and there are going to be several, probably a couple thousand people in the construction period. It's going to be, as I heard, 5% of those will be local. They'll bring them all then crews in from elsewhere. So the economic benefits are virtually nil. Now, if Mr. Tonodo, our friendly crook, were to say, look, everybody in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia is going to be much better off. You're all going to be several $1,000s or whatever it is off. That would be one thing. We're not going to be a nickel better off out of this thing. We are sacrificing Howe Sound for absolutely nothing and making a crook from Indonesia richer, a billionaire. I mean, I just cannot understand why the governments are doing this. But more than that, Jim, and I'll calm down on this. I don't understand why Christy Clark hasn't been telling us this. Why isn't she doing our due diligence for us? And why aren't the newspapers telling us about this? I mean, wouldn't you think that if somebody was doing business on this massive scale for you, that they'd be doing due diligence and finding out whether they were dealing with decent people, honest people, etc.? And wouldn't you think they'd be reporting back? Not a peep. I'm telling people now, there'll be people hearing this now will be saying, that can't happen. I didn't hear about that. Folks, it's happening, and it's very easy to find out. Just go Google a little bit. You'll find out everything I told you in the last 10 minutes is true, and you'll find it out in 5 minutes.
But we get to see those slick television ads by former TV reporter Jazz Johal telling us that the development of the natural gas industry is the best thing that's ever happened to BC.
on and on it goes. And I just can't believe. Matter of fact, half the people I worked with at CKNW seem to be touting for these people. But no, it's incredible. It really and truly is. Now you'll remember, Jim, and I remember, and I think most people listening to you and listening to us right now remember when we were going to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. Remember that? We're going to find substitutes, all kinds of different ways we're going to do this. We're going to use the sun, and we're going to, all these various alternates, and they're all there. They're all still there. All of a sudden, we're not doing that anymore. We're trying to produce more oil and fossil fuels than we ever did before. Now, I've got to tell you, and I don't know whether you want me to say this, but I got to say it. The newspapers, particularly the ones that own the Sun, the Province, and the National Post media, they have an actual formal deal with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and it's there in black and white. You can find it by Googling it. It tells how many times editorials are going to support them, columns are going to support them, and the money they're going to spend. They are in a partnership. Now, these are the people that are supposed to be going out and assessing these situations and fairly and squarely reporting back to the people. The Vancouver province is a declared official partner in ResourceWorks, which is the company that's shilling for wood fiber LNG. All you have to do, folks, is Google ResourceWorks, and you will immediately find, they'll tell you who their partners are, and you go down there, and right above RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, you'll see the logo for the Vancouver province and a big statement that they're partners, and they're going to tell you all about how wonderful they are, and they are partners. They're not just sort of supporting a little bit. They are physical and economic partners with these guys. I mean, it's the whole thing is absolutely beyond belief.
There's a proposal that Calgary International Airport change its name to reflect Stephen Harper, and a friend of mine from Calgary said, I'm all in favor of it if they name it Stephen Harper International Terminal. And you know what those initials spell.
Oh, well, yes. Well, I like the one where they're going to name Harper after the terminal.
Terminal Harper?
No, they're going to change Harper's name to Calgary International Airport. But that'd be better than doing it the other way around. But it's a silly season, I guess, right after an election.
Well, but I could just see people. Yes, I'm going to land in SHIT.
I think it's wonderful.
I think that's what they should call it.
Well, as a matter of fact, it's marvelous how people always are able to come up with something like that. That's pretty funny, and to cover a situation that other people take so seriously. And I guess I could take a little credit for this. There's been a lot of stuff on the social media that Christy Clark may be running to lead the national Tories, and I've put on there. Well, that's marvelous. Can you imagine that kills two birds with one stone? And I can't imagine anything better than her leaving British Columbia and going and murdering the Conservative Party. But there we are.
Rafe, thank you very much for chatting with us.
It's always my pleasure, Jim. Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to The Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.